What is going on, everybody? And welcome to the first inaugural Second City Gridiron live stream. Me, JB, and Lester, we are stoked to try to keep bringing you better and better and better content, whether that looks like a live stream, whether that looks like a video, whether that looks like a podcast, articles, whatever it is, you name it. And this is a big one to be talking about because free agency, more importantly, the dawn of the Ryan Poles era, kicked off a few days ago with a big trade that we'll be talking about here in a little while. But suffice to say, guys, I feel like these decisions that the Bears make with their money in free agency are going to shape the foundation of what Ryan Poles thinks his winning formula is going to be. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think right now the way that the Bears are going, the way they're operating thus far, I love the philosophy. I like what he's doing. He understands that he has a flawed roster and he's making changes. And it sucks to see our favorite players go, but these are the hard decisions that a smart GM has to make.
Yeah, he's in a grace period, right? Like he is in a time now where he has the goodwill of the fan base, so you're not going to see a lot of people get really upset. Well, I don't know. I haven't.
That first move was a polarizer. Let's just say that.
I haven't
Our
seen
own Bill
ton
Zimmerman
of people
hated it. That's the main reason I'm thinking about it.
He didn't think he got enough for him. I just think that you can pull that stuff off because it's the last guy's regime. You know, you can pull off a lot of Band-Aids when you're new like this, and that's what he's doing. So this is the time that we get to see what he really thinks of the guys that are on the roster, or he thinks about what's salvageable or what he can get out of, this player, that player. And, I don't think the moves are necessarily close to being over either.
No. I mean, what I know I always think about, and for the record, audience, John, thank you so much for the kind words. My wife and I are super excited. Obviously, it's a lot. Big change coming up. First child, but excited about that. But
kids are the best, just so you know, they're the best.
I can't wait, Lester. We got a second cat, too.
So that's cool. I'm in for that. Good cat talk.
Well, we had to get a second one because our first one was annoying us too much, and so we had to get basically our cat a pet. And so far, that's actually working out. But getting back to football, I know one thing that I see really commonly is in collegiate programs, whenever you change coaches, like I know Baylor's done it a bunch recently, the first year of the new coach is usually awful. I mean, it doesn't have to be terrible. In Baylor's cases, they have been pretty bad. But I've noticed in football, there is consistently a year zero. Unless you get Tony, oh my word. Help me out, Jeff. The Colts coach, Tony Dungy to John Gruden, Tampa Bay transition, which is rarer, right? You're normally looking at regime change involving a purge year, and then you start moving. So I'm glad that Poles is taking advantage of it. I actually think it's one of the best things for like modern organizations when they understand that they can just get away with doing a bunch of stuff that you will not get away with in year 4, right? Ryan Pace can't trade Khalil Mack because he traded for him, but Ryan Poles can get rid of the face of the franchise and George McCaskey will still sign off on it because it's one of the first moves he's making, which I get it. There's politics, but this is that 1 year where he can just do some ridiculous stuff. Like, aside from, what do you think? Can you go as far as trading Roquan? Which I don't even think anybody would want. But do you think somebody can get away with something like that?
I think at this point, everything's on the table. I mean, he talked about it. This is the NFL we live in these days. It's all about the quarterback. So getting the offense built up. Ryan Pace had a weird roster building situation because he thought he had the quarterback, which is why he traded for Mack. He thought he had the offense, which is why he put all of his money into the defensive side of things. And then the offense fizzled out, and then he was stuck with a weird roster the way it was designed. So, Ryan Poles, like you said, it's a reset. Everything's on the table. I don't think Roquan's going anywhere. I think he's going to be a key part of the defense moving forward, but I think it's all out there.
Yeah, I mean, in a vacuum, sure, everything's on the table. I think in the reality, there's no reason to move Roquan, a guy who's, a bullshit player at his position, who you're probably going to build this defense around over the next few years. He's going to be your centerpiece. So, but
to your point, Lester, I mean, maybe the better way to phrase it is that everything's on the table, or which is exactly what Paul said, but more everything has a price. I took your words unintentionally. So if somebody comes in offering a first and a second for Roquan Smith, now you're thinking about it. But if nobody's offering ridiculous price, right? Like nobody's willing to pay 160% value for what you think that player is worth, then no, you keep the player. That almost seems more like where Poles is at, where we may not see a bunch of moves, but I'm sure if somebody called about Eddie Jackson and the compensation was good enough, they may send him off regardless of what I think about him. Or because I love Eddie Jackson. It's probably more just a matter of marrying what they think they could get for a player. Take Robert Quinn, perfect example. He just had 18 sacks, right? Are you really going to trade him for a third-round pick and now deplete your entire roster of edge talent? Sans Trevis Gibson, a former fourth-rounder who looks good for a fourth-rounder but may not be ready to be a starting edge defender? Maybe not. Maybe you wait until the deadline where people can more easily talk themselves into being one pass rusher away. I get how a lot of this is working, and I don't necessarily think it means a fire sale is coming, you know?
I mean, it's fun as fans because, like, for me, I always enjoy this part of watching my favorite team. I enjoy the rebuild or the reset, if you want to call it that. I enjoy that aspect of a franchise. I think it's cool to see how teams go about it. Obviously, I want it to work out. I mean, it didn't work out last time. It's funny you talk about the head coach coming in usually a down year. Nagy's first year was pretty damn good. I think if we're looking at this, because look back at John Fox's first season, look back at maybe Lovie Smith's first season. Those were pretty bad years for the Bears. I think I can't see this team being as bad as that. Again, it all depends how far Justin Fields goes, and he could take this team. And I think he will take a bit of a jump. And they should be competitive. It should be fun to watch. We'll see what happens.
What do you want to do, Robert? You want to start the show? You want to?
Yeah, let's do it. You want to? I know you want to hit that gym afterwards.
Yeah, I gotta get to the gym.
Nice. Let's get rolling. I'm ready on you.
Yeah, start it up. We're recording, so go for it.
Good point. Why not? All right, we'll go in 3. What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to Bear With Me, a Chicago Bears podcast hosted by yours truly, Robert Schmitz, right here on the Windy City Gridiron Podcasting Network. And it is officially off-season time. We're recording here on Saturday, midday. Tomorrow starts the NFL Network's big coverage, where I'm sure we'll hear plenty of pre-tampering rumors. Then enters the strange legal tampering phase, which might as well be the start of free agency. It's a bizarre name. I mean, a true loophole made into a 48-hour I'm not doing any work today frenzy where I just stare at my phone. I'm sure I'm not the only one. But we've got a wild couple of days to not only recap, but also preview. And I'm here with both Lester Wiltfong, Jeff Berckes, the cast, if you will, of Bear and Balanced, as we get to go over Bears free agency. So let's start with where I think we can only start, Jeff. The Mac trade, the Tariq Cohen cut, the Goldman release. How are you feeling about recent moves that Ryan Poles has made?
So the Mac trade surprised me a little bit. I think that the compensation was maybe not quite what we were hoping for, but they were able to get out from the contract completely. And that is the main motivation, I think, for something like that. You get another top 50 pick, which is going to be good in a draft where you're lacking those picks. And it gives Ryan Poles some ammunition to try to remake this roster a little bit. I do want to mention that Khalil Mack was acquired to try and get some star power. And he did that. He delivered on that. And you can talk about the production maybe not being quite what you want, but he came in and he was a first-team All-Pro performer in his first year. He got the only non-Aaron Donald defensive MVP vote that year. And he was the quiet face of the franchise for the time that he was here. And to make this point, he was the chosen bobblehead for the 100th year anniversary that the Chicago Bears sent out to their season ticket holders. They sent a George Halas bobblehead and a Khalil Mack bobblehead out. And then they gave one out at every game. But the season ticket holders got the founding with George Halas and they got the future with Khalil Mack. Now, they didn't put Mitchell Trubisky on that bobblehead. They put Khalil Mack on the bobblehead. They knew who they had. They knew they had an all performer, that all-world performer. And so he filled that role. Now, again, whether or not you think that the trade paid off, I think you can make a pretty strong argument that it didn't. He did serve what it was that he was brought in for, which is a premier player at a premier position. And he did quite well when he was healthy and on the field for his 4 years here.
Yeah, for me, I looked at the max rate at the time that was Ryan Pace looking at his roster. They just went 12-4. They lost in the playoffs, and he's thinking, "Hey, this is going to be the piece. This is going to push us over the top. We need that premier stud on defense. The offense is pretty good." And then they made the big trade, and it just never panned out because I always talk about the offense. The defense can only get after the quarterback if the offense is putting up points. If the offense is not putting up points, then you can't do that. So the fact that the offense failed this franchise the last few years, that kind of devalued the impact that Khalil Mack could have had. I think if the offense would have been better, we would have saw more from Mack. Obviously, we would probably still be in the old regime. So things happen for a reason, and I think right now it was the right time to trade Mack. A 2 and a 6. That's the market. That's what the market dictated he got, and I'm okay with it.
So I love this move. And it's not that I hate Khalil Mack. I need to make a full disclaimer here as I dive into my side of it, that the NFL is a heartless business, and everybody knows that, right? But if I can make the argument that Khalil Mack, who is an over 30 pass rusher that hasn't had double-digit sacks in the last 3 years, is coming off of a foot surgery after 3 years of up and down injuries that some of them kept him out of games, some of them made him kind of a non-factor in games, and obviously he missed about half of the season. And Chicago's going to pay him, I think he had a cap hit of $28 million or more over the next 3 seasons. And you're still trading him for about $20 million to whoever team comes to him. So he's expensive. That's not much value when you phrase it that way. And if I can phrase it that way, somebody's agent sure can, right? Somebody on the team side sure can. So the fact to me that they pulled a second rounder, and sure, they got a 6th rounder too, but they pulled pick number 48. People keep talking about how Von Miller pulled back 2 third-round picks. One of them was number 64. Like, we're talking as low as it gets. I think that was a 2nd rounder technically.
Yeah,
but
the 2nd and a 3rd.
The 48 is a way stronger pick than 64. The number matters, right? It's like how we used to talk about how Nick Foles got traded for a 4th-round pick. That was a 4th-round compensatory pick, which is a huge difference from a pick at the top of the 4th round.
Let's not get JB going on the Nick Foles thing.
Look, it's not about that. It's more about, to me, the fact that they pulled that kind of value out of somebody of Khalil Mack's caliber, who, again, there are a lot of reasons to not believe in him. The way I see it is, what would you trade in the NBA, which, weird example here, for LeBron James at 39 years old, right? Khalil Mack at this point is going to be fighting an uphill battle to maintain the status that made him the apex predator. And he was an awesome Bear. And they gave him a $22 million a year extension. And then they took loans out of the Bank of Mac. They tripled down on that mortgage to make his cap hit just monstrous. It, to me, was the right time to trade Mac. It was the right time to move on. And it was the right move, because that move alone bumped the Bears' 2023 cap space from $93 million to over $120 million. Like, the freedom it offers the Bears going forward is just insane. So I love Mac. I think he was awesome for this franchise. I will not speak an ill word of him, but I do think that the value, frankly, if anything, I think the Bears got maybe more than he might have been worth. And I know that could be a salacious thing to say, but I mean, how much is a pass rusher worth in a trade? As Von Miller showed us, even the cheapest can only be worth about 350 points on the Rich Hill chart. Mac ended up with about 420.
Well, let's make the point, though, with the Von Miller thing. Von Miller's a little older, obviously, and Von Miller was in a free agent year, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So the big thing, though, with that was Denver was willing to eat $8 million of his deal. And so the Rams don't have the money. And so they were looking for a cheap rental as possible. And the Rams were all in. The Rams are going for a Super Bowl, and they got it, right? So they're willing to give a low 2nd and a low 3rd round pick for this pass rusher, which Jay felt was going to put him over the top. And it did work out, right? But Denver also ate $8 million of that. And so the finance piece is really important. because Khalil Mack had multiple years left on his deal.
Many.
And the Chargers assume all of that cost. The Bears did not eat any of it because the cap relief was more important to them than the capital in the draft, which, they're both important, but I think polls went for that first. And then from the Chargers perspective, I think it's a good move for the Chargers. I think that as the Chargers are my second team, I will say that I like the move, and I like that I still get to cheer for Mac, and I think that he gives the Chargers a very interesting 1-2 pass rushing punch, and so that defense is now going to be legitimately up a notch, and he gets to work with Jay Rodgers and Brandon Staley again. So this is one of those situations where it works on a lot of levels for a lot of people, and I'm happy for Mac. He's going to land in a comfortable place. He's going to be able to compete. That Chargers team should be pretty good next year, and the Bears move on from a great player. I think that's always tough, but the reality is in their timeline of what they're looking at in terms of competing, the balance of where they have their money, offense to defense, they needed to shift that. And so it is what it is. It's maybe not as much as Bill Zimmerman would like. It's maybe not as much as I would like in terms of the capital that's returned, but you do get the cap relief. And I think it allows you to then reset and start to move forward in the Ryan Poles era. So overall, I think it's a good trade for both teams.
Right. And like we're seeing in the comment section, I feel like the real key here when you're judging this trade is that was Khalil Mack going to be worth the $30 million in cap number at 33 years old in 2023 or 2024 compared to what he will be worth to the Chargers as early as 2022? One team is ready to go. The other team is not. This is, to me at least, the rare win, win, win. It's a win for Mack. It's a win for the Chargers. It's a win for the Bears. And it's frankly probably a huge win on all fronts. It was the rare moment where the business of the NFL is hardest on the fans, but I think from 30,000 feet looking down, this was a great move for all parties. I'm stoked about it. It, again, polarizing in the eyes of some, but to me, this was a great and gutsy move by Ryan Poles because sure, win, 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 like I just said, but trading Khalil Mack is going to rub a lot of fans the wrong way, even though it was probably the right way to start.
Yeah, from a fan perspective, we always look at draft picks. We always look at, what do they get in return? But, these teams look at it differently. They look at the money. They look at the books. And for them, it was more about the money. The fact that the Chargers were able to take a lot of that money on and free them up. And now the roster's in a spot where, yeah, this next season may be a struggle. But, 2023, let's open up the purse strings. Let's get some talent in here. That's what it's all about. Ryan Poles knows that, and that was a good move.
And I'll tell you what, Lester, to me, I know one thing I kept thinking about was with Quinn slated to make big money and Eddie Jackson slated to make big money, Max slated to make huge money. I was trying to figure out how a Roquan extension made any sense, especially with what linebackers are getting paid right now. We're talking upwards of $20 million a year. But with Mac traded, a Roquan Smith extension does make a lot more sense. I mean, you put $18 to $20 million on that cap. Maybe it's an overpayment. I mean, again, we're talking about a linebacker, right? Defensive values, I think, can be really hard to judge. But it's much easier to swallow than looking at a defense that has almost $100 million invested into 4 players. Now it's down to 3, right? You've got your 3 crown jewels in Jackson, Quinn, and Roquan, at least for now. Wouldn't surprise me if one of those players ends up on another team here in the next 365 days, but we'll see. I think that, like you said, that cap flexibility is huge, especially if they go the extension route with some of these guys.
Agreed.
What about the other cuts? You want to talk about chicken salad, Tariq Cohen?
Of course I do. Anybody heartbroken over those two?
Look, I really like him. One of my favorite players to be on the Bears in a long time. A lot of fun to cheer for. When he went down with that injury, you hope for a clean recovery. He clearly did not have that. And wasn't able to get on the field last year at all. Wasn't able to pass the medicals, and they released him on that. Did have some injury protection on that contract. So again, he still gets. Which I'm always going to cheer for the player. I'm always going to cheer for the player to get paid. So he had that protection in his contract. He gets the payout. With that, I hope that he's able to make a full recovery and contribute for someone. I'll cheer for him wherever he goes, as long as it's not that team up north. And I like the player, but it's a very easy decision for Ryan Poles to move on from somebody who couldn't get on the field, and it's the third running back. Khalil Herbert showed out as a capable backup. You got David Montgomery. You're going to need a pass catching back that you feel good about his health and that can rely on. That's someone that you can get either late in the draft or someone that you can bring in on a vet min or close to vet minimum deal. So it makes a lot of sense that they moved on from him, but it is significant because he's a fun player. He was a fan favorite for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. I think Eddie Goldman not coming back at full force really surprised a lot of folks. I think a lot of people were much more ready for 91 to assume the mantle of where he had been in 2018, 2019. And in 2021, he wasn't. So to me, his release makes a lot of sense. Another classic example of somebody who the Bears probably shopped around for a market, but you call enough teams and the teams talk to each other, they realize that this guy's getting cut anyways. And so he'll hit the open market. I'm very curious to see what happens to him. I mean, we heard rumors of him retiring as recently as a year ago. So we'll see what happens. But like you said, Jeff, I mean, Tariq Cohen at camp last year, almost a full year removed from his ACL surgery, could barely jog. Like, certainly couldn't jog without a limp. It's not to say that means anything specifically, but for crying out loud, when you've got a 5'6" running back who is electric, and I love him. I mean, I still think that his 2019 regression was more emblematic of the Nagy offense getting figured out, for lack of a better word, than the player specifically depreciating. But I mean, how much agility can a guy like that lose before they're just a 5'6" guy who's getting smoked out there on a football field? Like, you're not talking about, I think somebody said it this way: if Tariq Cohen was a 6'6" defensive lineman with the same injury, or an offensive lineman with the same injury, they'd probably still be out there. But we're talking about a running back who was already basing his entire skill set off of his agility that lost a lot of lateral agility. So I don't know where he's at in the recovery process, but to me, both of those moves seemed like no-brainer business decisions by the time they hit the wire.
Yeah, it's tough with Cohen because you hear that he can't pass his physical right now to play. So, as fans, we all want to see him do well. But that was a tough injury at the time, and when it happened, we're all like, "Oh, it's an ACL. It'll take a year to come back." But the year came and went, and he never came off the PUP list. So, of course, there's a lot of speculation. Was there a second injury? Was there a setback in training? Who knows what happened? But the fact that he can't pass his physical, I think as fans, we all wish him the best. And like you guys said, we'll cheer from wherever he goes, unless it's Green Bay. But he kind of fits a role for the Bears where, like you said, Montgomery and Herbert are your 1-2. Cohen would have been that third guy, the somewhat slot receiver guy at times. So this move is, again, it's the cap relief this year a little bit, but it's more cap relief in the future, and that's what the Bears are going for. Ryan Poles is looking towards that 2023 season.
Yep, and close the book on Eddie That's not Eddie Jackson, Eddie Goldman. The scheme fit is no longer there. Like, Eberflus defense is going to be a little different. He doesn't really fit in there. So it was time for him to move on from a schematic standpoint anyway. I think all of the other noise that we've heard, we're going to see, right? If he ends up signing somewhere and playing the year out, then, he wasn't ready to retire. Maybe those rumors were a little bit overblown, but, there was probably some, at least, consideration for him that he was maybe at the end of his football playing career from a personal standpoint too. So it's just a good time to move on from him, and all liked when he was developing up, but he's clearly just not the same player that we were hoping for when we were paying him that much money. So it's fine, moving on from him as well. Any other big moves?
No big moves specifically that really happened, but I want to comment, Jeff, that you mixing up Eddie Jackson and Eddie Goldman is, I just want to openly apologize to all Bears fans for the amount of times I'm going to refer to Ryan Poles as Ryan Pace. There's nothing that I can do about it. I mean, they hired a new GM named Ryan P, and as I keep trying to talk to friends about it, he keeps slipping in there. So I'm sure insane. Ryan Pace is going to remain a piece of the Bears fan vernacular for at least 2 more years or something like that. Hopefully we can get fully converted by the end of this next season.
Well, let me say, do you guys think that anybody else will get cut? Bigger names that'll get cut or moved before the season?
Danny Trevathan is the one that makes the most sense. I mean, he just older, injured, and he plays a position that's really not, you don't pay that position in this defense. So I think, with Roquan going probably to the weak side, I think you cut Trevathan, and then you bring in a lower cost guy at the Mike or the Sam, and there are a few others. Jeremiah at the Chow, he may not be the best scheme fit. He'll save you like $1 million or so. There are a few minor moves, but I think the Bears roster is in a good place for this reset because there's only like 40 guys that even signed.
Do you think
it's a good place?
Do you think when the musical chairs stop that someone is going to talk themselves into Nick Foles?
I was about to say that.
Sorry, it's your show, Robert. I should back up. But.
No, please don't worry about it. It's a show on the Windy City Gridiron Podcasting Network for all I care. But to me, anyways, the Bears have one of the premier backups in the NFL on their roster. Now, whether the league still feels that way, honestly, I actually don't know. So I may walk that statement back. But the Colts don't have a quarterback on their roster if you don't count Sam Ehlinger, which I'm not going to. So outside of, like you said, Lester, Jeremiah Atuachu, I don't think that the Bears are going to cut Nick Foles. The $3 million to me isn't worth it. He is a nice veteran presence, say what you will, and having a good backup matters. But $8 million of cap space they could save if another team, even like Indianapolis, decided, hey, we trade for Nick Foles. Worst case scenario, we got a cheap backup quarterback or maybe a cheap starter. Best case scenario, we draft somebody on top of that, and Foles warms the seat before the new guy's ready to come in. I could see it. Like he's good enough to be traded for that tiny $8 million price.
I think Ryan Poles will let it be known that he's available. I don't think he'll shop him at this point just because, you do need that number two. Justin Fields last year played and he got hurt quite a bit. And as much as we don't really like Nick Foles that much, he is still a capable starting quarterback in the NFL. In a pinch, he can do the job if need be. He's not a guy you want as your top guy. He's no QB1, but I think as your backup, he'll be fine.
Andy Dalton?
Yeah, Andy Dalton, who has the money to still come off the books all those void years. So as soon as he's officially released, that's going to hit the cap as well. But I think with Foles, if someone comes around and offers a deal, they'll listen. But I think he may be worth more to Chicago as that veteran presence number two, because all the reports from last year was that Justin Fields, he had a good relationship with those two vets, Dalton and Foles. So maybe he sticks around in that role. But I think regardless, I think the Bears need a third guy. I don't think he's on the roster now.
No.
I think they need a third quarterback to come in on the practice squad that has a closer skill set to what Justin Fields does, just so you have a guy waiting in the wings.
Okay, so I have to mention this about Nick Foles. In the wide world of the NFL is the land of spinning anything in a positive or negative direction, turning Mac into this aging, unproductive, hurt pass rusher just so that you can get lesser compensation. Do you think Ryan Poles is out there marketing? I mean, this guy just scored 25 points and led the Bears to an outstanding late game comeback against the Seahawks. I mean, say what you will, the guy can play. Like, I could almost see that one spot start coming into it to say, guys still got it. Like, that late touchdown and late conversion was nothing other than old school Foles magic. You know what I mean?
Old school Foles magic.
What they need to engage whoever is around the Mitchell Trubisky camp right now and all of the buzz that Mitchell Trubisky has been getting in this offseason. They need to engage that group to do some Foles work to get a price. I think that if they were able to unload the contract and get something, it doesn't matter what, and he is comfortable with it or whatever, they can open up that money and go out and get a guy like Tyrod Taylor or someone like that to back up if he doesn't land a competition for a starting role. That would maybe be a little bit more closely aligned to what they're going to do with Fields. But I would welcome getting Nick Foles off the roster at any price.
Now, you mentioned what they would do with the money, and Jeff, that's a perfect segue into talking about free agency philosophy, right? Let's talk through what we think the Bears ought to do with their money, because sure, we could rattle off a whole bunch of names. We could talk about Brian Allen versus Ryan Jensen. We could talk about James Daniels, Austin Corbett, but I feel like the place to start here is Ryan Poles is entering his first offseason as the Chicago Bears GM. And Lester, what do you think he should do with the money? Are you looking to spend heavily on defense? Do you want offensive line investment? Are you thinking wide receivers? Where's your head at?
I think we go to what Ryan Poles said at his press conference when he talked about, the best way to help a young quarterback is get him a good receiving course. Right? I think he's gonna, if he does spend big money, it's gonna be with a top-ish tier type of free agent at wideout. I think he's gonna also look to spend money at center, maybe tackle once they decide what they're gonna do with Tevin Jenkins. But I think if there's gonna be something you're gonna call a splash move, it'll be receiver. Maybe Marquez Valdes-Scantling, who I'm not really high on. Maybe Allen Robinson comes back if that bridge can be repaired at all. But I think you need to find a guy that you trust Justin Fields can learn and grow with for a few years, because as much as we all like Darnell Mooney, I don't think he's going to be that true elite number one that a team needs right now.
Jeff, what do you think? Because I know you and I were pretty in sync in the pre-show.
I think that given the market and where things are at, and then historically what has paid off in terms of where you invest your money, where you get good returns, I hope that Ryan Poles is going to spend the bulk of his like premium money at interior offensive line, because those contracts generally play out. They generally work out, and they generally are worth the money in the long run. And so that is specifically center. I think that if they miss out on Ryan Jensen, who I understand he's going to get big money, and I'm comfortable with it, and if they don't get Brian Allen as the backup, that backup option, they're going to have to use one of those picks in the second round, probably to get a guy that come in that can start right away at center. So you're going to have to spend some kind of premium money to pair with Justin Fields here. So do you want a veteran presence at center who can settle the offensive line, who can be a force multiplier along that group of five? And I'm willing to spend that money. You want to go out and try to get a quality tackle. There's not a lot out there. You'd have to shop at the top of the market. I mean, do you really think that you can go out and afford Teron Armstead? I'm not convinced that you can do such a thing, but that depends on what you think about Tevin Jenkins and all that. The thing about wide receiver, I see so many good wide receivers coming into the league in the last few years. Every year's class just has a ton of talent. You've now got 2 top 50 picks. I would hope that Ryan Poles would see that he can get good return on interior offensive line investment and free agency, and use those picks plural, to go after wide receiver. And maybe not both second rounders, maybe 1 second and 1/3, whatever. But like his day 2 picks, I think he should consider doubling up at wide receiver and filling the room with a couple of rookies, Darnell Mooney, and a couple of mid to lower tier free agent signings at wide receiver, because I don't think that without the presence of a true number one wide receiver on the market, which they're all gone now, without that presence there, I don't think it's worth your money.
So to piggyback off of what you're saying, JB, and to talk to you, Lester, about the wide receiver spending, I think what scares me the most about the wide receiver market is that if you look back historically, it seems as if whenever you buy a wide receiver, you're buying them at the purchase price of one rung above whatever their playing level is. So Marquez Valdes-Scantling, who's probably like a number 3 receiver, would not shock me if he's going to get $10 million a year, which is like a 20% increase from Taylor Gabriel's 2018, like $7 to $8 million a year, which matches the cap increase. That's all I'm saying. Like $10 million sounds ridiculous until you remember that the cap has gone up 20%. So we have to increase these deals accordingly. DJ Chark, probably a good number 2 receiver, is going to get paid like a low-end number 1. Mike Williams, a very good number 2 receiver, just got paid like the Amari Cooper contract that I was on Twitter saying is probably too expensive, but and he got traded like an hour ago, so he's off the market. I don't see the option if Gallup is going back to Dallas. Like Christian Kirk to me is a good player, and he's not worth $15 million. But Brian Allen, a center, worth $11 million, no question to me. Ryan Jensen, if you want to go designer brand on your center, I'll pay $15 million because I'm a huge believer. Maybe it's because I talked to you, Jeff, and Bill, who are all offensive linemen, in the understated impact of what a good veteran center can do for your offensive line. I mean, especially when you look at how these guys would be able to come in and assist Justin Fields, kind of like a coach on the field. I know that's super dorky to talk about, but when you've got a center that has been around the league and can adjust protections without needing your sophomore quarterback to do it for you, I think that's really valuable. And then guards never get crazy money. Like, you could end up buying an offensive line and gasp, backloading some deals because you've got $120 million of cap space next year. Like, you go low on initial cap hit, you could buy yourself an offensive line and head into the draft and draft all your wide receivers. And sure, you'd end up with a really young team that might not be ready to do more than compete for a wild card spot, even if Tyke Taylor got all these guys playing at a really high level by the end of the year. But by 2023, you'd start to have a young, affordable, and gelled unit that hopefully would move forward well, at least to me. Because I feel like when you look at the guard market, like, I don't know if you realize this, Lester, there's no less than 4 really good zone guards, whether it's Laken Tomlinson, Connor Williams, James Daniels, or Austin Corbett. A lot of players coming out of teams that are going to run similar offenses to the Bears that are putting guys on the market. Or you've got at center Ben Jones, Brian Allen, and what was it, Ryan Jensen. Like, you've got options at offensive line, whereas at wide receiver, I feel like you're going to be fighting all the other piranhas in the lake for the same guy and ending up paying way more than they're worth. At least that's what I'm thinking.
Oh, I'm with you. I mean, if it was me, I wouldn't spend buku bucks on a wideout. I would kind of let the market come to you. Like I said, I know with a guy like MVS, he will get overpaid. I hope that's not the guy they go with. But just going off what Poles said, he said he wants to get someone that comes in. And I do think that they are going to draft a guy. I think, you have to start addressing that, because right now, who do they have on the roster? They have Mooney and they have Daz Newsome, and then they have 2 other practice squad guys. So you've got to bolster the receiving corps. I know Jarvis Landry could be cut by the Browns. They just made a big trade for Cooper. That's the big rumor right now that he may be gone. I think you just got to find a guy that you trust, and you can pay him for maybe a 2 or 3 year deal. So that way you got him in, he's there like a security blanket while your rookies have a chance to develop. If the Bears had a pick in the first round, and you can get a guy like the Bengals did with Chase, if you're going to get a guy that comes in is going to be the legit stud off the bat, yeah, that's fine. But waiting for the second round, you can't go into the draft hoping one of your guys falls to you. That's going to be your top receiver. I think you have to address that spot first, and then once the draft comes, you also address that spot, because you need 3 legit stud wideouts in today's NFL.
Yeah, I mean, it's not an easy gambit to walk, especially when the Bears are losing as much defensive talent as they are. I mean, right now, depending on let's put it this way. I could talk about Thomas Graham at nickel. I could talk about Thomas Graham at outside corner because I really like the guy, but we're talking about a 6th round pick playing one of 3 spots at corner, and the Bears really only have 2 corners worth naming. Like, there are a lot of positions that they need a guy at. They need a guy next to Roquan Smith at linebacker, assuming that you're not an Ogletree or Trevathan believer, which I am not. They need to find a 3-tech defensive lineman. They need to find a second safety. Again, we've done this for 3 years now. Like, they need some help all across the defense. I don't want to ignore the defense, but maybe I sound like every nerd on Twitter. I feel like if the offense isn't fixed, if you haven't surrounded Justin Fields with talent, you haven't gotten that train out of the station, the defense doesn't really matter. Like, we saw Mitch Trubisky with an elite, if legendary, defense in 2018, and they got bounced in the first round. Say what you will about they were a kick away from winning the Super Bowl. The results are the results, that they got bounced in the first round. So I want to see the Bears, from a philosophical perspective, move all that MAC money into the offense. And even if that means low cap hits in 2022, because they got $40 million in dead cap, they have an insane amount. The record, I think I saw last year when the Eagles did this, of teams with $40 million in dead cap or more is despicable. So we'll see if this Bears team really has the resources to be good in any sense. But I think that massive amount of cap that they have in 2023 and 2024 can come into play, because you move some of that money into the future. I know there are going to be plenty of people who are going to be furious, but it would really help them lock down some very solid players this year, if not outright stabilize the offense.
Yeah, I mean, the best wide receiver on the market is Allen Robinson, and it didn't go particularly well this last year. Now, obviously, it's a new regime, but is there enough of a bad taste in everybody's the mouth of everybody to just be like, yeah, we'll go on. He's from Detroit. Detroit has a need. I could see him wanting to go back to Detroit. Jacksonville has a need and an interest. I could see him going back to Jacksonville and, returning there. But then after that, it gets real thin. So I guess that's my thing. I think that you're going to sign a couple of veterans to have steady presence. And then I think that you're going to go into the draft and needing to draft a couple of guys. And you're not going to get Jamar Chase, but there's so many good players that are coming out. If you take a couple in the top 50 picks or top 75 picks, you're probably going to get early contributors. I mean, the Bengals, as good as Jamar Chase is, he didn't come on until a little later in the year. And T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd were having bigger years early on before Chase, really took over and took control. So you do need multiple guys. I don't see that guy being available right now as a free agent. Maybe somebody shakes loose, but not right now. Do you want to get into more specific names as other free agents that you're interested in?
Sure, let's do it. I mean, at wide receiver, I don't want to make it sound like I'm asking for Ryan Poles to sign nobody. I just think that whether it's Auden Tate or Jamison Crowder or Cedric Wilson, that you can get more of your buoy guy, your wide receiver 3 or 4. I mean, hey, you know what? Yeah. I'll say it. Marquez Valdez-Scantling is going to get overpaid, but he would be a nice fit in what the Bears offense is supposedly going to be. I mean, I hate that I'm saying that, to be clear. I'm almost not even happy about this. But as far as having a wide receiver that can fly down the field, can get wide the heck open, blocks really hard, and is apparently, according to reports, very astute and already has experience with the new offensive coordinator in his first role, I get it. Like, if the Bears are targeting him, I understand why. I don't know if the money will ever be worth it, but sometimes it never is with free agents, and you just hope that he's good enough to justify his role. But I do hope that the Bears are cheap-ish. We've talked about the offensive lineman I know I'm excited about. I'm really curious to see if they sign a tackle, because Larry Borom is just good enough to not be a hole, right? He's just good enough and young enough to not be considered somebody who has to be replaced, but he's probably not a starting role lock either. So if you can get the right deal for a Dwayne Brown, heck, if you could even get Trent Brown to agree to an amenable deal, maybe the Bears go in that direction, but you'd be almost immediately demoting Borom to swing. And I know that would not sit well with some fans,
I think with Borom, the regime has to go into this offseason looking at him as a definite piece of the puzzle. But they can't count on him being a starting, whether it's tackle or guard, wherever he ends up playing. You can't count on him being a guy that's going to be a starter. I think Tevin Jenkins, you assume he'll be a starter, whether to keep him at tackle or move him into guard. You have to figure out that. You talked about James Daniels. Do they bring him back? I know there was some talk about his market being, over $10 million a year. That's kind of pricey for him considering what he's done, but he is really young still. Maybe his best football's in front of him. Maybe he fits the new scheme and the new offense a little better. So I would like to see James Daniels come back. We talked already about Brian Allen. In my mind, he's already a Bear. I just think it's such a no-brainer. It makes sense. It makes, yeah, exactly. He's from the area. He is what the Bears need. He's not going to be the top center on the market. He's 26, 27 years old. So you can sign him to a pretty good deal. Count on him to be in Chicago for the next 4 or 5 years, barring injury. And then that spot is set for your O-line. And then you build out from there and then see what happens. But again, what's Jenkins? What's Borom? This regime has to figure those things out.
Jeff, I thought you said it really well talking about free agents living up to their contracts, right? When you sign Olivier Vernon in free agency, a lot of times you're not going to find that electric star player that you thought, because unfortunately, if he hit the market, that means the other team didn't believe in him and had their reasons, right? But offensive, that's being very generic about wide receiver, about edge rusher. I know that I picked on a specific player, but it's more to say that offensive line, I think you can get real value out of. When you sign a guy for $11 million over the next 4 seasons, you can actually get that $11 million back in terms of their play level. And that's something that really excites me here in free agency. I think that there will be plenty of 1-year, 2-year deals for the Bears, like short little things to just fill some holes. I think Al-Qadim Muhammad is somebody that's almost assuredly going to come over from the Colts system. Another guy, I think he's an edge rusher. I think Zaire Franklin from Indianapolis, a linebacker they drafted in the 4th round 4 years ago, could also find his way to Chicago. But I think on defense, they're going to be relatively cheap, and their big splashes are going to come from that offensive line spot where they can try to build up. Think of it as like a small Cleveland offense, right? It's not going to be absolutely loaded with stars, and it's certainly not going to be the Saints offensive line that was almost all homegrown, but I bet they're going to invest pretty heavily there.
Yeah, I think you need to ask yourself a question. Why is this guy free? Why is this guy on the market, right? And there can be a number of different reasons, but if you have determined that, well, he's loose because there was a regime change, he doesn't really fit the new scheme, but he fits ours, those are good opportunities to bring those players into your building. If he's shaking loose because he was a malcontent and no one liked him and whatever, like, well, you're gonna have to consider if you can bring him into a locker room that's strong enough to take that personality on, right? There are a number of reasons, but there are some that are good reasons why a guy might be out there. And if that's the case, or it's a guy that's late in his career that's looking for, he's trying to hold on for one more year, and you think you can get something out of him, okay, those are okay to bring in too. There are some guys that their team decided that they weren't the guy that they wanted to extend. So why would you give them that money, right? Some teams are occasionally so talent rich at certain positions that maybe that makes sense to bring in. But for the most part, there is why would you pay the free agent premium, the 120% that it takes to bring them in the building, if their original team wasn't that interested in bringing them back? It's something you really have to consider with a lot of these guys. I think the Colts connections are always very interesting. I've mentioned Mo Alley Cox before. There's a guy that I'm interested in bringing in. I think he'd be fun. And Malik Hooker, I think, is interesting. He would have played for Eberflus if Eberflus likes him. I think he's still out there as a free agent and would be an interesting guy that probably would be just above the vet minimum to play next to Eddie Jackson, and that could give Eberflus a lot of interesting, fun things to do on that back end. So those are guys that I've kind of thought about. Again, I agree with Lester that if Brian Allen isn't a Bear, it's hopefully because it's right. They signed Ryan Jensen, and I'm all in. If they don't get either of those two guys, and I'm not gonna. Ben Jones is a little too old for me. And Ben Jones isn't. He's not Alex Mack, right? He's not Rodney Hudson. Those are the success stories of these older centers that signed and they really solidify an offensive line and they really perform well. Ben Jones is fine, but he's not good enough to raise to that level, in my opinion, of a guy that has played at an elite level that's a little older. I want a younger guy if I can, elite guy or younger guy, somewhere in between there. If they miss on those, I'm going to really start to watch the draft to see if Tyler Linderbaum's short arms are going to cause him to drop into the second round. And then I might be cheering pretty darn hard for Linderbaum to get to 39 and see if the Bears can get a young center to plug in there.
But even so, JB, I mean, one thing, first of all, I got to say, I have basically spent the entire offseason assuming that veteran center is the starter on next year's offensive line. To me, a free agent veteran center makes truly all the sense in the world. And what has me worried just a little bit is that if they can't lock down one of these veteran centers, they have to teach another one. And I think center is a hard position to learn. If anything, I don't think people talk quite enough about how offensive line is a developmental position. It's very hard, unless you're Tristan Wirfs, to just trot out a rookie and they dominate. I mean, there's a lot of technique that these guys have to learn, especially when you go from facing the guy across from you at Rutgers to Jeffrey Simmons almost week to week. And he's just a almost random defensive lineman to pick out. That's not Aaron Donald. That's not Nick Bosa. That's not a lot of these guys that people have to face. But I remember when I did, this was years ago, did a big old case study on Charles Leno and looked at age and how it matters in offensive linemen across different positions. Their prime obviously is when people are going to play their best football, but in particular, rookie wide receivers and rookie running backs tend to start a little hotter than rookie linemen, who tend to take, let's say, 2 or 3 years to warm up, right? So like you're saying, Lester, James Daniels' best football could be in front of him. I mean, it's a position with a little bit more longevity. And so being able to bring in, like I said earlier, a veteran center that already knows how to make calls within an offense, to me is invaluable, because it means that you don't have to trot out, I don't know, Cody Whitehair is somebody that people have talked about moving. I would hate that move purely because he hasn't played center in as long as he has. And I think there's a very good reason for it. I mean, if Harry Highstand didn't want him there, and also Juan Castillo independently didn't want him there, I don't understand why I need to get excited about the new offensive line coach wanting him there, because it just seems to me like there's too many people that are saying he's not a good center.
I mean, he was fine when he was there. And I think the big reason why he was given the job back was because of how much him and Mitch got along. You know, Mitch trusted him. The Bears trusted him to make the calls at the time when Mitch was kind of struggling at that. So that's kind of why he got that gig back over James Daniels. I think in hindsight, it would have been the best for the Bears, you know, a few years ago to leave Daniels at center at the time. But, you know, there's things that happen behind the scenes that, you know, they had to make a change. So I would like Daniels back. You mentioned Cody Whitehair, you know, besides the possibility of some talk about him going to center, there's also a possibility he could be a cap casualty. I mean, I think he should stick around just because you don't want to have, you know, you don't want to gut the whole position. And while he did have a down year, you know, last season, he's still quality enough where you can keep him in this spot and grow with him. But I think regardless, like you guys were talking about, they got to draft a guy in the interior, whether it's a center, whether it's a guard, whether a guy that can play both, a guy like Zion from Boston College. I think he'd be a good guy if he falls in the draft. You got to get younger on the O-line, and you got to get younger with quality, top, high-end picks, because the previous regime, besides Tevin Jenkins, you know, they really didn't spend, you know, top picks at that spot.
Now, the only thing, remember, Lester, that we got to think about is that if they were to cut Cody Whitehair, which I agree with you. I mean, Cody's not had a good last 2 seasons, and he showed real worrying signs even as early as 2019. Inconsistency is not what you want out of an offensive lineman paid, what, $12 million a year at this point? But if they cut him this year, they would actually take on $200,000 more on their cap than they currently are. So it'd pretty much be a lock for a post June 1st, but you don't get a post June 1st cuts money earlier than June 1st. So unless the Bears spent just about every dollar that they had and then waited until June 1st to then sign their draft class, which, hey, I've seen some people do, that Cody Whitehair would be basically dubbed the money that you would take into the season, because teams like to have $5 to $10 million around training camp season, just in case. Maybe they cut him, but it feels to me like he's going to be a Bear in 2022, which, at least, like you're saying, what they want to do with Cody Whitehair changes the calculus of how you process that offensive line. Because somebody like Laken Tomlinson, who's a left guard and has been in San Fran for quite some time, to me makes a lot more sense if your plan is to ditch Cody, which you could do. I mean, it's not like I'm going to sit here and defend him, right?
Well, Okay, so his tape is what it is. It was bad last year. If Poles comes in and sees that, which he's going to know a lot more than us in watching O-line film. And he asks around and says, was this guy in the training room? Was he dealing with something that wasn't disclosed? Is this, is he fighting something off? Or he talks to him. And if he had a clean bill of health, relatively speaking, all linemen are hurt at all times with something. But if it was just kind of the normal wear and tear, and there's no underlying issue that we didn't know about, that was a really bad year. It's a really concerning bad year. And you had some instability around you, but it's enough to be concerning. If it's an injury thing and it's going to get cleaned up, we're just going to count on him to make it back to those levels. The year before, he played most of the year at center, and then when he was moved back to, which, he's not a natural center. He struggles with some of the things that you need a center to do. When he got moved back to guard, he was playing pretty well.
Yep.
Yeah. That the hope was that he was going to come in last year and he was going to play at that level that he ended the year before at guard, and he was just going to pick that up. I don't understand, just in my head, just cannot wrap around how you go from a guy who looked really good at the end of one year and then have an entire year that's really not good at all, unless there's something that we don't know. There's a piece of information that we don't know, specifically an injury. Guys in the offensive line generally don't fall off a cliff like that. There's a little bit more of a step gradation down. So I I do not understand Cody Whitehair's 2021. And
So
that's what I'm going to say. So you bet on him to get back to decent levels, and I think that's a fair bet.
here's what I need to ask you guys, because I think that this is the question I know I would love as much offensive lineman input as I could get. When you are an offensive lineman and you know one of the guys next to you really struggles, right? Because in my opinion, Cody Whitehair played the entire season right next to Sam Mustipher, as did James Daniels. And especially as the season wore on, every time they ran outside zone, I saw them take extra effort to make sure Sam had his assignment handled, especially when they were playing some really good defensive tackles that would just annihilate plays. I mean, go back and watch Week 4's game against, I think it was the Packers, and certainly the game against the Buccaneers, and you'll see Sam Mustipher giving up a lot of ground in the run game that kept things from getting off the board. How much does that affect an offensive lineman's play? If on a down-to-down basis, you have to make sure that Sam's got his assignment handled before you get back to yours. Because like you're saying, Jeff, I mean, it got to the point where Cody would get a basic one-on-one assignment and just get torched. That's on him. It can't all be Sam Mustipher's fault. But does having 5 guys that trust each other make as much of a difference as I've come to understand it does, like even on an individual play level?
Right. So there's multiple levels, there's multiple things, and then depending on the position, right? So Lester spent most of his playing career at tackle because he's tall and
Very tall.
gifted genetically to be able to play tackle, whereas I am not that tall. I'm decent height, but not the 6'4" that you need to play tackle. So I played most of my snaps in the interior. But if you're talking about like run game stuff, your first goal is in some run scheme, some run plays, is that you're going to take on a double team, and you're going to one of you is going to slide off to the next level. But you're not going to do that until you have a good enough feel that the other that your teammate has that guy in a position that he needs to complete the block, right? So if you come off the ball and you're the guard, and your goal here is to double team to the defensive tackle, and then you're going to move to the second level to take on a linebacker, you're not going to leave that until you feel like that block's secure. Because if you leave too soon to go get the linebacker, the defensive tackle slips the center and is going to make the play in the backfield. That's a worse outcome. So you're gonna stay with that block until you feel comfortable with it. If you're in a position where you feel like you can't leave that block because it's not won yet, and you feel uncomfortable, and you've seen it on film so much that that the center still isn't there, you're going to hang with that block too long, and you're going to miss the next level, right? But offensive line, a lot of that is going to be about feel. It's going to be about working together for a long time. And as Lester and I have talked about, I want 5 guys that can play. I don't want 2 stars and 3 scrubs. I want 5 dudes that can play, because eventually they're going to learn that feel part of the game, the part that you can't really describe that well, that doesn't make a lot of sense unless you've necessarily done it. And I think that might be part of it, because you did have a weaker player playing center. But like you said, there was a lot of plays where he was just getting beaten pass pro.
Yep.
And that has nothing to do with Sam Mustipher. That has to do with Cody Whitehair.
Yeah, I think part of it is we've heard reports in the past about Cody Whitehair is really hard on himself. He gets in his own head at times. We've heard this talked about by some of the guys that covered a team. So I think that could have been part of it. Part of it was maybe he just wasn't comfortable with what's happening around him. Maybe he wasn't comfortable having a brand new left tackle next to him, even though with a guy like Peters, a veteran. Maybe he just had to get that comfort level. Maybe he just never felt comfortable. So maybe he got in his own head. I know there's a lot of things like you guys are saying where it's about the feel of it, and maybe he just didn't trust it. I don't want to turn into a bash Sam Mustipher thing, because I think Sam Mustipher, for where he came from, for what he's done in his NFL career, outstanding.
He's a UDFA.
I'm rooting for him. The Bears brought him back. I would love to see him, bulk up a little more, work on his technique a little more. I would love to see him come in and win that job. I think that's a great story. But the reality is, last year he was a bit of a liability at times. And I think you got to get that interior figured out. And whether it's a free agency, whether it's, bringing back James Daniels, moving him to center, or even if it's Cody Whitehair going to center, you got to have someone at center you trust to get the job done. So we'll see what happens.
Mm-hmm. I think at the end of the day, we've alluded to this, right? But I can't help but feel like at the end of the day, the priority here in free agency needs to be building up the offense. Move that spending from from the defense to the offense, and I think that's best done with the offensive line. I mean, it again, the free agent or the draft is just a great way to skim value out of the wide receiver spot because, like we talked about, those can be a lot of really expensive contracts. But I can't see Justin Fields, who I love him. Super accurate downfield. The what is it? Brickwall Blitz on Twitter did a whole bunch of analysis on deep ball on deep balls, and he came up with Justin Fields as a top 5 deep passer in the NFL last year, which I feel like the eye test backed up. But we know the kid likes to hold on to the ball, so we're going to need an offensive line that can give him even just an extra 0.5 seconds. Right? Even an extra half second, quarter second, everything makes a difference with a kid that mobile. And if you can draft some wide receivers that can help him out, great. Any linebackers, or as we move into closing thoughts, other defensive positions that are like guys that you have your eyes on, or do you guys feel like it's just a matter of seeing how the chips fall and who the Bears bring in?
Yeah, I think with JB said it, they're going to look to the Colts. The Colts have a lot of
Right.
free agents on defense. They know the scheme. They understand the hits principle that they want to do in Chicago. So I think bringing in guys like that, you're going to get by for the next couple of years with these lower end hustle players, the real try hard guys that understand what they want to do. And I think the Colts have a couple backup linebackers that, that can kind of come in. They could probably, buy some time. We talked about, you talk about a guy like Hooker who knows the scheme. I'm not high on him, but, cornerback of the Colts, Xavier Rhodes is out there as well. You got to bring in a guy that knows the cover 2, the Tampa 2 scheme and understands the philosophy behind it. Because it's a different than what the Bears had, even though it was a lot of zone stuff a year ago. It's still a little different, but plus, like you said, who did have a corner besides Jalen Johnson? Thomas Graham, I think he has a lot of potential. Can't count on him.
Right.
I mean, even if you bring in a guy like Xavier Rhodes, who I'm not high on, he is still going to be a huge step up from Duke Shelley and Kendall Vildor.
Right. I can't help but feel the same way, that it's a matter of buying time, just holding spots down on defense, that you're grabbing guys that you don't have to coach that much. I mean, I love the fact that the Bears fundamentally took the entire Colts defensive staff with them, if only because it means that whether you like the defense or not, they're speaking the same language. On offense, everybody's so young. Honestly, I want to just throw as much talent as you can at that side of the ball, because they need as many guys that they can work with as possible. And hey, if you want to talk more about drafting a wide receiver, I'll throw out that what's his name? I've just called him Tyke. Is it Tyke Taylor, the wide receiver coach? He might be one of the most let's call it name brand coaches that they brought in this year, their wide receiver guy. And I think that spells well for drafting. I mean, it's just a matter of, at least I think, sign whatever you need to on free agency, or during free agency, so that you don't have to go into the draft with a bunch of needs. But frankly, I feel like the Bears are looking down the barrel of a season where they're going to try to get a low talent defense to perform at a medium level and invest as much as they can into making their offense as high talent as possible.
So what you're saying is the new wide receiver coach is a bit of a step up from the guy they've had here the last few years?
A bit, to say the least. And thank you, Jordan Tyke Tolbert. Yes. But he's like, we've gone from now Furry, who I'm not 100% sure really did anything. The only wide receiver that we saw develop.
He did lift.
Oh, he lifted. That's
and he was fired up and he screamed a lot.
Yep.
Yeah.
But we only saw one wide receiver develop, and it's the guy who during COVID went out there and called plays to himself. So outside of Mooney, nobody got a lot better. We'll see what happens with the Bears going forward. But JB, any closing thoughts before free agent frenzy?
You're not going to fix it all in 1 year. Like,
right.
let's keep that in mind, right? That if everyone thinks that, hey, this roster is going to be ready to compete for a Super Bowl when August rolls around, it's not the case. That's not the goal this year. The goal this year is to protect Justin Fields and to give him enough weapons so that you can see if Justin Fields is the guy. We all like Justin Fields a lot, but he has not proven that he is going to be that top 10, potentially top 5 quarterback yet by any stretch of the imagination. And so the goal this year is to surround him with enough talent so that you can properly evaluate him. That's the goal. It's also to avoid you want to avoid not putting anything around him so that you ruin him, which has happened to plenty of quarterbacks, right? So that I guess is like goal number one, is the low bar. But the real goal here is, can you protect him and can you give him enough weaponry so that you can evaluate him at this time next year and say, yes, this is the guy, we're going to keep moving forward with him.
And at the risk of starting a fire, JB, in 2018 and 2019, that's exactly what the Bears did with Trubisky. And from there, the organization obviously fell apart. But at the time, it was a really nicely performing Tariq Cohen. Allen Robinson was one of the better wide receivers in the NFL. Taylor Gabriel was a solid number 2. And Anthony Miller was a super talented draft pick that never really panned out. I'm well aware that I'm not talking about the Dom Perignon of offensive weapons, but I expect to see a similar blueprint here in the second year of a cheap offensive quarterback contract, because if you don't know what you have by year 3, you don't know how to make your decisions. Like whether it's moving on or whether it's fully investing, you got to get what you can to know what you need to know come 2023, or else you're going to be shooting in the dark.
Yeah, I'm excited for what they're going to do. I love, like I said, I love this part of a franchise. I love the resetting aspect of it, having a new offense, a brand new defense. I think it's exciting to see what Luke Getsy does, because the Matt Nagy system. What the hell was the Matt Nagy system? I talked about. I was on a show yesterday, and I was talking about this a little bit. Is you look at the Andy Reid stuff. We didn't see none of that stuff. Yeah, it's not the same talent, but where are the rub routes? Where are the guys, scheming things open? Like if you watch Andy Reid, there is no, 30 hitches a game. It's a total different offense. I don't know what Matt Nagy was doing, but I am excited to see the Luke Getsy system, a more Shanahan-esque flow to the offense. I want to see Justin Fields on the move. I want to see Justin Fields in play action. I'm excited to see where this team goes. And like JB said, it's all about getting the pieces around Justin Fields to see if he's your guy. I think he's the guy. I think a lot of Bears fans thinks he's the guy, but the Bears have to see that he's going to be the guy moving forward.
Gotta know. I mean, if you don't know, you throw more years away. But I'm excited. I think this is a great time to be a Bears fan, because we really do get to ride in the land of low expectations, but potentially high yield. I mean, last year, everybody had low expectations and there was nothing good to come of it. Like we were almost hoping, not really, but if the Bears did go to the playoffs with Andy Dalton, oh gosh, maybe people get extended. If they lose, we get to spend an entire year watching a bad football team, and great, now we move on. But this year, we've got, you want to talk about the young quarterbacks out there that are ready to take a step? If things work out, Justin Fields could have a 25, 30, 35 touchdown season. This could be a lot of fun, even if you're losing football games, because I don't know about you guys, but even sometimes some games that the Bears won last year just felt like a grind all the way down to the final score, where it'd just be two teams. I go back to the Giants game that technically the Bears dominated. It was still not fun to watch on offense. And so
nothing Matt Nagy did was fun to watch on offense.
It's funny you mentioned the system thing, Lester. I can't help but feel like every once in a while you'd see a play that clearly came from like Kansas City genetics, but especially come 2021, there was just so much mush where they had like half thought out an idea, or maybe it was a fully thought out idea that was just half coached or half installed. And it was just gross football. Hopefully Getsy and the offense can keep everything on the same page. But yeah, JB?
I was just going to say that if it does work out, if Justin Fields is the guy, the NFC is open. Rodgers is, I don't know how many more clarified butter cleanses Rodgers can do to keep himself playing, but it's not going to be forever. Let's say it's a year or two. Russell Wilson's now in the AFC. You don't have a lot of premier proven talent. Who knows what's happening with Kyler Murray? And I'm not even sure you can necessarily call him a premier talent. He's very talented, but I don't even know where you put him in the quarterback rankings. And so for the vast majority of the best quarterbacks are in the AFC right now. And Justin Fields has this opportunity to take the Bears somewhere, because there's just a real dearth of talent at quarterback in the NFC right now. And if the Bears have one of the few guys, you could see the Bears competing for NFC championships in the near term.
Yep. I think what the Lions do at quarterback is going to be a lot of fun here in the draft. I mean, a lot of weird choices, especially if they don't draft a quarterback. It'll remind me a whole lot of when they drafted that corner, whose name escapes me, with number 4 overall, and still wrote out. But look, it's not even a dunk that hard. It was just so weird to pass on Justin Herbert, regardless of having Matthew Stafford or not. But I digress. The point is, you've got Kirk Cousins, who I think could be fairly described as he is who he is. You've got Aaron Rodgers, who's aging, still super good. Bears are probably going to be competing for a wild card spot just about as long as 12 is still in the division. But he can't be there forever anymore. The Lions have to make a decision. And just to throw this out there, if Justin Fields gets all the time in the world, somebody said this in the comments, I don't want to steal it from you, Jordan, you don't need the wide receivers to be dynamos. Take a look at who Russell Wilson has been working with, the obvious comp for Justin Fields in Seattle. Guys like Tyler Lockett that are really good route runners can get open downfield given time. And so you throw a couple second or third round picks at this spot, I think you could end up with some really good talent alongside Darnell Mooney that he's got an obvious connection with that, like you're saying, JB, could make this team more competitive than we realize. Super Bowl? Nobody said that. But
I'll say it. Let's go. Super Bowl.
Nope.
Bears, Super Bowl. No, not yet. Okay.
Disagree. It would take some magic
Yeah.
to get them there, I think, before 2023 or 2024, but way more fun. I mean, the teams that can score, if the Bears become one of them, you just never know. Like exactly what we saw with the Bengals this last year. Maybe not the greatest example, but the Bills certainly, who could just score like crazy. So we'll see. Either way, the next 4 or so days, I think, are going to be huge for the Bears. And I don't expect them to sit on the sidelines. It's just a matter of, do they spend their money on Taron Armstead and throw $20 million at somebody that could play as few as 8 games a season? Or are they spending it on deals we like, for lack of a better word? We'll see. Either way, thank you guys so much for jumping on. Jeff, what do you got in the works? We'll go to Lester next.
I'm going to start laying out some plans for a special podcast series. I'm not going to reveal the name of it yet. I'll keep that a surprise. I'm pretty excited about it though. But I'm going to be interviewing fans and trying to get a pulse of the fan base as we head into this new era.
Awesome. Lester, what about you?
It's free agency frenzy, so the site will be jumping nonstop. We'll have trackers up every day. We're going to have so much content because the Bears are going to make so many brand new players in the next few days.
And on my end, I know I'm excited to get back into whether it's draft content, free agency analysis, everything. I'm coming out of a bit of a family hole. I'm having a child, which has made things wild, and it did not help that Elden Ring came out just 2 weeks ago and completely consumed me. So between those two, I've been AWOL. I'm coming back. But either way, thank you guys so much for listening in. Always fun doing this sort of thing. And until next time, Bears fans, bear down. And thanks so much for bearing with me. Sweet. Nice. JB, are you running to the gym, or are we keeping this on for just a couple more minutes?
We can go a couple minutes. I need to know what character class you're playing in Elden Ring.
Well, at this point, I have despicably already run 2. So I played a wretch for the first time. And then the second one.
You're all the way through?
All the way through is a real question mark with this game because there's
I know I'm playing
much optional.
Yeah.
But yes, I have become Elden Lord on one. And then on the second one, I'm holding off until like the very end of the game for a little while. It's mostly for PvP reasons, but big nerd energy over here.
You have to be spending dozens of hours then.
I'm just, I don't mean this lightly. Yes, dozens of hours, but also I've played so much Souls in my life that I just sort of cleaned through a lot of it.
Oh, look at you. Maybe you need a Twitch stream. For that. That's interesting.
Football Twitch stream.
I'm trying to figure most of it out myself, but occasionally I'm looking stuff up. But I'm more of a completionist, so I like to try to beat everything up, and, to do all the catacombs and do all the deep dive stuff. But
super fun game.
Oh, it's great. It's perfect. Souls games are the best, and then you get an open world concept, and unless your wife might like it. This is the game that I would like. I love these types of games. This is kind of like Skyrim, I'm assuming, kind of the same vibe. Yeah, I mean, it's very open world like that, but then like the Souls games are very much higher skill. You're going to die a lot. Like it's high skill, unless you're Robert, apparently.
Well, Robert still dies a lot,
Yeah.
but gets it around the 4th try instead of the 80th.
I did the mage build, which is kind of the worst idea in a lot of ways because you really need a lot of support to make that work. But
hey,
I find it interesting. So
you're the guy who punched down the werewolf in Bloodborne.
I did.
So
because I didn't know how to equip the initial weapon. That was I don't look anything up. Until after a while. But anyway, yeah. So sorry. We can go a few more minutes and then I gotta take off.
I feel like it was just one thing that I almost didn't get the chance to talk about enough because we're days after the fact, was when Bears traded Khalil Mack flashed up on my phone. I was blown away. I mean, honestly, closer to the first time we saw it than I want to admit, just because I thought for sure they were going to trade Quinn. Mack made sense, and I've been kind of quietly beating like a very tiny little, we should consider trading Khalil Mack drum for about 2 years. But I hit the point where, like you said, JB, there was just so much franchise emotional investment in Mack. I can't believe they ripped the Band-Aid off. But I was just shocked. Want to mention that.
Ryan Poles said it at one of his press conferences. I think it was his first press conference when they asked him about the roster. And he said he is not emotionally invested in these players. So he's looking at the entire roster through fresh eyes. He's going to do what he has to do. And we're seeing that. I mean, he's trading, fan favorites, so to speak. So Ryan Poles gives no F's. So he's going to do this his way. He's going to make this team his roster. And this entire thing will be turned over in a couple of years here.
Oh, I hear you. I think if anything, Lester, if Ryan Poles wants to do anything to prove to Robert Schmitz, a guy on the internet, that he's really a metalhead, right? He won't extend David Montgomery, who, like, the owner just mentioned in a presser that he loved him specifically, like by name. So we'll see.
That's Bears football, though. Running backs. That's Bears football. Running backs and defense. It's so strange, but I think I'm with you. You can't. I mean, if the price is right, yeah.
What's the price?
Yeah, what's the price exactly? We have to see what happens.
I mean, the trouble that I have is, I think extending running backs would be a lot easier of a conversation if these running backs came to the table being like, I'll take $3 or $5 million for the next 4 years, and I'd just like most of it guaranteed because you're probably not getting it all out of me. But they don't. Like, Dave Montgomery's going to come to the table being like, $8 million is my absolute floor on a per year basis. That's a lot. I mean, we're talking about that being a lot for Marquez Valdes-Scantling, which it is. But for Dave Montgomery, it's great because he gets the ball a lot. But I don't know. I mean, it's such a complicated conversation when Khalil Herbert had a higher yards per carry. And I get it. Better offensive line. What could Monty do? But the problem is, what could Khalil Herbert do with a better offensive line all the same? I mean, if you got a faster guy, more holes, wouldn't you be thinking that you'd get even more yards just off of the, like, turning what could be David Montgomery's 12-yard gain into a 40-yard gain? I don't know. I'm tantalized by outside zone runners like Herbert.
I think there's this idea of like a hometown discount, that doesn't really exist. It's really in some respects it's a hometown premium. And when you see some of these teams locking up premium position players early, and then generally that looks pretty good later on. But with running back, it feels like the opposite. When you lock up a running back early, it's actually a hometown premium. And if you would let that player go out onto the open market, they're not going to get what they think they would normally get. Or if they do, like, let another team make that mistake. And so you're almost better off to say, like, look, man, we want you part of this team. We really like you. But if you feel like you're there, like, go out and test the market. And if you get paid, like, we'll cheer for you. Like that's great. But we just can't allocate that much money to this position group and get where we want to be. And so you hope that maybe they go out, they test the market. And if you've played it right, if you're open and honest with them and, you left the door open, maybe say like, hey, look, I got this, but I do feel comfortable in Chicago. Like, I'd like to come back and play if you can match this contract. And then they have that option. But I think right now, running backs are hometown premiums. They're not hometown discounts.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and it's funny you talk about that being like a hometown premium. I think you're right. If Ryan Pace had gotten to complete the James Daniels extension that I'm sure he wanted, I don't think he would have gotten – I think he would have gotten more than it sounds like. And granted, I'm pulling this out of Chad Forbes. So big grain of salt. Let's just be really open about that, right? But it wouldn't surprise me if Daniels' market isn't great. I mean, good players on good teams get paid good money, right? Marquez Valdez-Scantling, perfect example. He's been on the Packers. He's had one of the best quarterbacks in football. He gets open deep, partially because he's sort of a forgotten weapon behind Devontae Adams. It happens, right? James Daniels, if you're high on him, is a good player on a bad team. And those guys are where you can find value, because who cares how good James Daniels looked in the game against the Raiders when in this other game, Sam Mustipher's man or Larry Borum's man whipped him, right? So we'll see what happens. But if Daniels isn't developing some massive market, color me unsurprised, because his tape wasn't like salivatory. It had its warts. And some of that's because he played on a bad team, but that's the business.
Yeah, his tape is very solid. It's average. It's nothing special. Like it's not Quentin Nelson. If for guys that want to watch the really good O-line play, there's nothing dominant about what James Daniels does on film. But I think he's good, and I think he's young, and I think he's worth bringing back, because I just can't see them redoing the entire line at this time. They got to make some changes, but you got to have some stability. And I think a guy like Daniels, again, if the price is right, I'm not going, $10, $12 million a year for him. You get him lower than that, I think you have a nice deal, 3 or 4 year deal. All the money is guaranteed up front in the first couple of years. I think that's a deal you got to make.
Mm-hmm. He's a guy that can play. You can play with him.
He can play.
Right.
Yeah.
One last thing I think is worth asking, just as we get into free agency, we're very removed from everything, right? Now we've seen the combine. It's time to let the chips fall. If you got to choose, would you take Justin Fields or pick number 7? And I don't know, somebody else out of last year, and try things with Ritter, Willis, Corral, Pickett, Zappi, and Strong?
I wasn't impressed with any of the quarterbacks at the Senior Bowl. Were you?
I love Malik Willis.
Well, I mean, like, he had the most potential, but
that's the thing, right? We're talking, if we were talking potential, I'd be all over Willis, and to me, potential is all that matters. I mean, I hate to be super duper, what's the word? Like almost take it or leave it. But the NFL is entering an age where sometimes you just need your quarterback to score in 13 seconds. And if your guy can't, you lose. Like Ryan Tannehill, to me, and Jimmy Garoppolo were the difference in their games. And sure, I'm like picking one, but Ryan Tannehill earned the first seed in the NFL and couldn't beat the Bengals, who, yes, they went on to the Super Bowl, and I'm well aware of that. But I don't know. Like, to me, I would take Justin Fields again and again and again. I don't say that as just a Bears fan. To me, the fact that he was QB4 in last year's class is still ridiculous. But this class would freak me out if I was any evaluator.
I'm the same. I mean, it's so nice as Bears fans that we don't have to worry about a quarterback this year. Justin Fields may not end up being the man, but at least this one off season, we're content. We don't have to look at those draft reports on those quarterbacks. I'm good with it.
Yeah, I guess what I'm saying is that if you are going to invest in a guy that has a lot of potential, but that he's not really polished enough to put in a game yet, right? Like maybe Trey Lance should have played more, but that was a contending team. They felt good enough with Jimmy G, right? I think they probably did the right thing in a lot of ways. But if you feel like that guy needs a redshirt year, I mean, you are already changing the calculus of what that guy could be. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't do it, but the Bears weren't in a position to really do that. They didn't have like a strong veteran presence to sit behind. So, if you would have went into last year and your quarterbacks were Andy Dalton and Nick Foles, and that's it, and then you would have drafted whatever. With your pick, maybe you probably just draft Tevin Jenkins, probably, right? With their first round pick, right? I mean,
or whatever,
right? Yeah. 20, they probably they liked him, so
which is hilarious, right? Just thinking about, if you change it, you probably overdraft the guy,
or potentially, right? Or just like you draft
higher than where he went.
You knew you needed a tackle. There was talk about them potentially trading up for a tackle, which was almost certainly Penei Sewell, right? So well, or Slater, one of the two, but they were going to trade up for either quarterback or an offensive tackle because Ryan Pace was going to Ryan Pace.
Heaven forbid you disallow the Justin Fields trade and they really do trade up for not a quarterback. Oh
right.
My gosh,
so I'm just saying, like, so you're going to come into this year with your first round pick, but you're in a quarterback class that is underwhelming, or maybe it turns out to be fine, but like, who in the world do you feel comfortable with drafting early in the first round and starting this year? And if that's not your plan, then again, you're now another year and your entire roster is another 1 or 2 years older. At least the Bears have a guy that has a crazy high ceiling that they can try to build around, and they can do it now. That's I think the big part of the calculus there with why Justin Fields was and we got so freaking lucky.
Yeah.
The talk so much throughout last offseason leading up to the draft was Lawrence 1, Fields 2. Maybe you could make an argument for Fields being number 1. And then all of a sudden, Zach Wilson throws off platform and everybody's, oh, look at all that off-platform stuff, because that's what Mahomes does. That's really what we should do. We should get the off-platform thrower. And then somehow Zach Wilson goes second? Are you kidding me? And then you draft Trey Lance, who a small school guy. To me, that was a ton of risk. And you're saying that was a better pick than Fields. I don't see that. All of the things and all the people that pass and all that stuff that happened, I mean, it's a 1 in a million, man. The Bears got lucky.
Yeah. I mean, look, to me, what I think was the funny part about the Justin Fields experience last year, and I'll throw something together about this later, but I feel like Justin Fields came out and we didn't realize how raw he was until he really started playing. I mean, as much as people talk about the OSU thing and as much as Bears fans blew it off saying, who cares, right? Cardale Jones, Braxton Miller, all these guys have no bearing on Justin Fields. I can't help but wonder whether the guys that come from Liberty, like Malik Willis, have a slight leg up on the guys that can trust their people to beat anybody across from them, just because what happens when years of experience tells you we're going to run this play and he is going to be open, instead of we're going to run this play, I don't know if he's going to be open, I don't know if my offensive line is going to hold, because the latter better emulates the NFL. The bright side is, even in the short window we did see Justin Fields play in, he got better. He got much more used to it come the Green Bay game, come the Minnesota game. Sure, we've got the Pittsburgh game. We've got the San Fran game. Those are great examples. But from a down-to-down basis, Justin Fields was boom or bust very, very early in his career. And by the end of the season, he got much better about downs not working out and him not taking a mission-critical 12-yard sack that kills a drive, or jumping up in the air and trying to throw a screen pass over a defensive lineman. Like, that stuff happened, but he started to iron it out a little bit and stop trying to be the hero that makes everything work, or expecting his guy to be open and being just like shocked when he's not. And I can't help but feel like we may look back and say Justin Fields was a lot rawer than we think he was, that he made the hard stuff look easy, but he really made that easy stuff look very hard. And if he can fix that easy stuff, really excited.
It's possible. It's also possible that the way Matt Nagy ran his offseason just kind of did not do any favors to Justin Fields. I think everyone talked about the whole, Alex Smith thing. It was such a different animal in Chicago. Andy Dalton was new to the team. You shouldn't have gave him the job immediately. You should have made it a competition. At least give him at least enough reps with some starter quality players where you can see what you have in Justin Fields. I think if everything's equal, Justin Fields probably still doesn't win the job coming out of camp. But I think it's better in the long run if you would have had some of those reps early.
Mm-hmm. Can't help but feel the same way. And I don't want to waterlog you guys. Are you worried about the defense going forward? Because I do feel like they're going to get underinvested, in a word.
It's the Tampa 2, man. It's all about the hits philosophy. I'm excited to see what they do with this whole thing here. It's going to be different. It's going to be cool to watch. I just want to see how they bring in some of these veterans that really already bought into the system, and how they let some of these guys go that really aren't part of the future. But I think defensively, I think they're going to be fine. I mean, Matt Eberflus has been through a transition, I think, twice before, going 3-4 to 4-3. He knows how to do it. He'll do it right. I think the defense will be fine.
Yeah, I'm not worried.
No,
I can't help but feel like the goal of the team changes, right? where the Rams maybe let's go with Fangio's defense. Fangio's defense at its highest could be one of the best defenses in the NFL. I feel like the Bears right now are going to be playing more of a low floor or a high floor, low ceiling defense, where if you loaded it with, the best talent in football, right? Like the best talent in football, it still might not sparkle the way that Fangio's 2018 defense did. But if you throw less than adequate talent at it, it's still going to be better than Fangio's defense was in 2015, which was the year that he was 28th in defensive efficiency, because I know one of those happened in Chicago.
I think that was his first year in Chicago when
2014
transition. I think that was still with Jared Allen playing outside linebacker at that time. I think
right.
It might have been so.
My thought,
Bears legend.
Yep.
Hall of Famer.
My thought to anybody worried about the defense is I think 2023 is going to be where they infuse a little more talent in it. Sure, 2022's defense might get underinvested, but my thought has been, the more I look at the way that teams operate, that when you draft defenders, a lot of them play pretty quick. Whether it's Adrian Amos, who jumped right in, Eddie Jackson, who jumped right in, obviously there are plenty of examples all throughout the NFL, whether Minkah Fitzpatrick, Derwin James, so on and so forth. Yes, you get a lot of these guys that you draft them, and sure, 4 years later, they're still good, but doesn't mean that as a rookie, they don't sparkle a little bit. And so wouldn't surprise me if the 2023 defense or 2023 draft, should things work out in 2022, is pretty defense heavy.
Yeah.
To counter what they'll do here in 2021 or 2022, but we'll have to wait. JB, I know you got to run. We're an hour and a half into the live stream. We can close this up whenever.
Nice.
Yeah, guys. Thanks for joining us. People that have the numbers, looks like there's a fair number of people that are watching us. So we'll do more of this stuff. We'll plan on bringing a lot of our podcasts live stream this way and cutting them up afterwards. So appreciate it. This is the new channel to do that. So please, hit a subscribe and a like. And if you didn't like it, I don't know why you stuck with us for 90 minutes. But
Lester, I'm going to pester you about doing like a Sack Watch live stream, like a short one that just buoys it.
Someday.
That sounds good. We'll come up with more content than just us talking. So.
We'll definitely get something figured out for sure.
Cool.
Awesome.
Thanks, guys. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Thanks.